Hello everybody, in this video we are going to talk about how to use the different laws of exponents to simplify an expression. Now before we can actually talk about how to set these problems up, how to simplify them, how to organize them, we do need to talk about some of the vocabulary that we are going to use. So before we do anything else, let's go ahead and look at this part of our notes where we have this 2x to the third power. So even though this is combined and together, and it is one term, inside this one term we have three different parts, and they all have a name. So the 2, the x, and the 3, we're actually going to look at those all separately. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is we're going to go ahead and circle this 2, because the 2 is the number in the front, and this is called a coefficient. So anytime you hear me say coefficient, I'm talking about the big number in the front. Okay, and then we have this x. So I'm going to ask you to circle the x, and even though the x is not a number like the number 2, it is considered a variable. So I'm going to go ahead and write variable right here. But because the variable is the one that has the exponent attached to it, we're also going to call this a base. Now, a coefficient can also be considered a base if it has an exponent attached to it. So in this case, the 2 does not have an exponent on top of the 2. So that's why we're not writing base for the number 2. So the number, the big number, is going to be our coefficient. Our letter is going to be our variable. And in this case, this variable has an exponent, so it's also considered a base. Now, the last thing that I'm going to ask you to circle is this number 3 up here. So notice that the 3 is our exponent. So I'm going to go ahead and draw an arrow and put exponent. Now, I do want to point something out about our exponents. Right now, we've been used to seeing an exponent as a positive number. But please keep in mind that exponents can also be negative. They can also be fractions. They can also be decimals. The one thing you are going to notice in this set of notes is that our exponents are either going to be positive, negative, but they're also going to be zeros. Okay? So the first part is to make sure that we understand what are the different parts to this problem, because we're going to separate them and then organize them according to what they are. Okay? So with that being said, let's go ahead and look and talk about what we're going to have to do to simplify some of these expressions. All right, so one of the things that I have written over here to the side is the steps that we're actually going to follow to help us until we get comfortable working these problems out ourselves. So this one tells you step by step how we're going to simplify an expression by using the law of exponents. Now, keep in mind that we have 5 different laws of exponents, 5 different rules. 2 of them are basic, and then 3 of them are going to be our main rules. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do before you do anything else is to stop and look at the expression. Look at the problem on your paper. Identify which one of the rules we can start using, because some of these we will be able to use more than one rule per problem. Number 2 is to organize. We're going to take all our coefficients and put them together and next to each other. Then we're going to look at all the different variables, because we are going to have more than one variable in a problem. And what we want to do is we want to move them around to where all the x's are together, all the y's are together, z's, or any of the other letters. So that's the first thing we want to do, is to make sure that we organize it in a way that helps us simplify it a little bit better by coefficients and variables. And then the last step is to combine. Okay, there's certain things that we can combine, and there's certain things that we should be able to simplify. And you'll see that as we look at some of our problems today. Now, one of the main things that I want to focus is what we have written down here. In order for your answer to be your final answer, you have to make sure that you don't have the same of one variable. So you're only allowed to have one x, one y, one z in your final answer. We're not allowed to have negative exponents, and we're not allowed to have 0 exponents in our final answer. So one of the things that I'm going to show you today is how to get rid of the negatives and turn them into positives for your final answer, and how to get rid of zero exponents for your final answer. So the first part is just identifying the vocabulary, kind of get an idea of what order we're going to do things in, and then what your final answer needs to look like. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the basic and the zero rules before we look at some of the other main rules. All right, so I'm calling this one of our basic rules. We actually have two basic rules. So the first one is the zero exponent rule. So the rule says that any number or variable that is raised to the zero power. So I'm going to go ahead and write in a 0. So any number, any variable raised to the zero power will always simplify to a 1. So notice that I have a couple examples here. I have 2 to the 0 power, and it is equal to 1. But don't take my word for it. We can grab our calculator and we can type it in here. So if I do 2, and if I raise it to the 0 power, so remember on your calculators you can use this little arrow right here, raises it, and you can type in anything into that box. So we're going to raise it to the 0 power because we're going to test the 0 rule. Notice it gives us a 1. All right, I'm going to do the same thing with this one, but the only thing I'm going to ask you to do when you do these kinds of problems is please make sure that your base, and in this case it's our coefficient, our -8, is in parentheses before we raise it to the 0 power. Okay, so this should avoid any kind of confusion that your calculator will get, and that lets you tell your calculator that the 8 and the negative are together. So I'm going to go ahead and open up parentheses and do -8, close it, hit your little arrow, we're going to raise it to the 0 power, and notice that it's also a positive 1. You can do this with any number, no matter how big or how small. So if you want to do 0.025 and raise it to the 0 power, you're going to get 1. You can pick a really big number, like 1,598. If I raise that to the 0 power, it's always going to be 1. So as long as we know that any number raised to the 0 power is 1, that automatically tells us that a variable raised to the 0 power is also 1. Why? Because the letter just represents a different number. So it doesn't matter what it is. If it's raised to the 0 power, it is always going to be 1. And if you're unsure, type it into your calculator to confirm that. All right, that is our basic rule. So from now on, you see it, anything raised to the 0 power, then you can cross it out, or you can change it to a 1. Okay? All right, the next basic rule we're going to talk about is the negative exponent rule. Maybe you're working some problems out, and then you realize that you have a negative number. So for this one, let's go ahead and fill in some of these blanks. It says the negative rule is any number or variable raised to a negative power. So we're going to put negative. Will need to be moved across the. Now you can use, I'm going to use two different words interchangeably here, and I'm going to say fraction or division. And so fraction or division line to change its sign. So if you notice that there is a negative exponent sitting on the top of a fraction, then you can take that and its base and move it to the bottom, which is the opposite side, and it will change it from a negative to a positive. You can actually do that both ways. So notice that these next ones, you can notice that when we move it, it doesn't matter which direction you move it in. As long as you move it, it will change its sign. So move a negative exponent to make it a positive exponent. And then down here, we're going to do the opposite. You can move a positive exponent to make it a negative exponent. But the main thing I want to point out is by moving it across the division or fraction line will cause it to change its sign. Now we do have some examples here, but I actually want to throw them in the next video. So I'm actually going to stop right here, but I'm actually going to show you how to use the negative exponent rule with actual problems. So let's take a pause right here, and then I'll see you guys in the next video.